I will qualify it by first saying I had never been a chief of staff, and my then boss, so Jay Flatley, who was CEO of Illumina at that time, had never had a chief of staff. So it was sort of one of those leaps of faith you take in your career, which I think is a big lesson in and of itself. Is don't be afraid to take some leaps of faith that might give you a different lens on the company or the brand or whatever it might be, but. A chief of staff role is something, and I actually talked to a lot of chiefs of staff in different industries as I was transitioning into that role. It's such an interesting role because it's kind of do anything and everything that your boss, the person your chief of staffing needs you to fill in for. So it can be all different kinds of things.
Welcome to How I Made It in Marketing from Marketing Sherpa. We scour pitches from hundreds of creative leaders and uncover specific examples, not just trending ideas or buzzword-laden schmaltz, real-world examples to help you transform yourself as a marketer. Now, here's your host, the Senior Director of Content and Marketing at Marketing Sherpa, Daniel Burstein, to tell you about today's guest.
Given your role in the organization, maybe you're a director or C-level or even just a manager, you have certain positional authority. By virtue of your title, you can tell people to do things. Well, that's pretty nice, huh? But if you only use your positional authority, how well will those things really get done? Will they get done at all? The best employees must perceive the value of what you want them to do, which is where our communication superpowers as a marketer, they're so helpful for business leadership as well. And why I love one of the lessons from our next guest's career. As a marketer, it's important to lead up, down, and side to side in companies, not just top down. Here to share the story behind that lesson, along with many more lesson-filled stories, is Karen Possemato, Chief Marketing Officer of Seer. Thanks for joining us, Karen.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Daniel.
All right, so let's take a quick look at your background. Bachelor's degree in biochemistry and cell biology. Very, very smart, a lot smarter than me. You mentioned you started in a lab, wasn't right for you, and then you went on to be technical services specialist and technical writer working on product marketing for Thermo Fisher Scientific. Grew in your career to senior product and market manager for QIAGEN, VP of corporate marketing and communications for Illumina, and now you are the CMO at Seer. At Seer, Karen has grown her team from 4 to 14 in the past 2 years, and it is still growing. And Seer is a publicly traded company listed on Nasdaq. The company achieved revenue of $15.5 million for the full year of 2022, and it grew revenue 134% and increased instruments shipped 129% year over year. Congrats on that growth, Karen.
Yeah.
Can you give us a sense, what is your day like as CMO at Seer?
Well, it's very busy. So Seer is an early stage company in the life sciences field. So we basically sell products to scientists around the world so that we can unlock, what's going on with disease. So it's there's a lot going on. I could be spending time with customers. I could be spending time with my team, spending time as part of the executive team. There's a lot of meetings and collaboration that go on, and I'm switching constantly all day long from different topics. So I have to stay loaded up on my coffee and stay flexible in my mindset.
And what did that mug say? Long live science? Or?
Long live science. Gotta love that.
Very nice. Okay. I want you to get a long live marketing one next to it, though, so you can kind of go back and forth between the two. All right, well, we'll see what we learn from your current role, but let's also unpack what we can learn from your career. The first half of the podcast, we talk about lessons we learned from the things you made, because that's something we get to do as marketers. We get to make things. I've never been an auditor, podiatrist, or something else, but I don't know if they leave work at the end of the day having made something. We make brands, we make campaigns, we make products. So for your first lesson you mentioned, as a marketer, it's important to lead up, down, and side to side in companies, not just top down. And I love that. I think one thing we overlook sometimes as marketers is we're so focused on communicating to an external customer, we forget that we should focus internally as well and communicate as well. So can you give us a sense of how you learned that lesson?
Yeah, well, I have spent my career in high growth companies. So I'll start with that, whether it was my first commercial role at Invitrogen, which then became acquired later on by Thermo Fisher, or whether it was with Illumina, where I started. The company was 350 people. And when I left a few years ago, it was 10,000 people. I mean, having to bring people along I think has been an important theme in that journey. So, whether you're advocating for a new product, whether you're building a brand, or whether you're launching a campaign, you kind of, you're crafting an identity, an experience, whether it's for the customer, the employee, recruits, whoever it might be. And, it's really important to make sure that you're thinking in a multidimensional way in the organization, really thinking to connect on all those levels, not just selling to executives, not just selling to customers, but selling to employees, partners, the community at large. In the field that I'm in, we're selling products that are going to actually cure cancer. So try to understand, what is going on inside of our biology that's driving those things. So connecting to that and selling across can really, I think, put fuel in the engine, if you will, because then you have everybody leaning into what you're doing.
Great. And can you give us an example? You mentioned at Illumina, you had to create conversations in the workplace around the importance of genomics. So I wouldn't even know how to do that, but can you give us a sense of like how you did that and what was the result and kind of what were you going after?
Yeah, I think as we got larger at Illumina, it was about connecting employees across the company to the mission. So the mission was, unlocking the power of the genome to improve human health. So Illumina is a company that's all about DNA and understanding the genome and how it impacts disease. So as we got larger, we had to think about, well, how do I make that tangible to somebody in finance, for example? How do I make them feel like they're part of the brand experience, like they're part of creating this mission and this vision at Illumina? And so we did things like create community engagement programs that everybody could participate in. Making capes for kids at Rady Children's Hospital that brought them closer to a patient, bringing patient ambassadors in whose lives and treatment plan had been impacted by genomics to do presentations in the company, kind of connecting philanthropically with the Illumina Foundation and making that about some of these key themes that were related to the mission, like helping to help patients with rare disease find an answer. So really making it tangible and real were some of the things that we did. And I think that's true no matter what kind of product you're selling. People want to connect intellectually and emotionally with the company and the brand that they work for.
Well, I think it would be especially hard when it's an intangible product like you have. Like, so if you are making and selling phones or iPads, or, here you go, it's a shoe, it makes sense. So I used to tell this joke. For B2B marketing, but I think it's true for any complex product where, you're at a dinner party or something, you go back to Thanksgiving for, your family and you're talking to the aunt or uncle who doesn't understand what you do. And you're like, oh, I'm in marketing. And they're like, oh, great. Oh, I know ads. And, what do you market? Shoes or clothes? Or, I see ads, I see it on TV. And then you're trying to, well, it's B2B. So it's like, you ever been in an elevator? It's like, yeah. It's like, okay, well, the panel where you push the button, it's like, yeah, okay. Well, behind that panel, how it gets up, goes up and down. It's like, yeah, okay. Well, like there's a software control mechanism. We sell software control platforms that we sell to the makers of the panels in elevators that they go to then sell to elevator companies. They make it go up and down. And then the person you're talking to at the dinner party is like, okay, what do you do, Bob? Because that doesn't make any sense, right? So when you're talking about something as intangible, in a sense, as genomics, it's not a shoe, it's not a phone. Okay, boy, this is a nice shirt we make. Like, is there, I like some of the tactics you've talked about already, but is there anything special you have to do to go that next level to get that understanding?
Yeah, I think so. At Illumina, it became easier over time because there were referenceable companies using Illumina products like Ancestry.com or 23andMe. So it became easier as people became aware of these types of products and genomics became more mainstream. So I'll use the example of Seer, the company that I work for today, is in the proteomics space. So proteomics is kind of the next step down from genomics. It's about the active molecules in the body and how do we study those so that we can understand things. So I always like to use, again, stories. I think, you mentioned marketers have this communication superpower. I think leaning into that is so, so powerful. And storytelling is at the center of that. So when I'm describing what we do at Seer, it's complex and intangible because there's no like mainstream companies that people know about that are using proteomics in that way yet. But most people understand the role of insulin in diabetes, or the role of these plaques that you hear about in the brains of patients with Alzheimer's. And so those are proteins. And so understanding how those work and the fact that there are millions of different forms of proteins in the body at any moment in time, how important that is to understand in biology. So simplifying it, using an example or a storyline to convey it, and make it something that someone can relate to. I mean, in science, so we get very caught up in the data, the technical details, so one of the biggest bridges as a marketer is like, how do you make that relatable? Because even your customers, some people have a grandmother with Alzheimer's, or they themselves have diabetes. So that's what propels people to change their behavior, is connecting with something on a personal level, in addition to, being inspired intellectually to cure cancer or whatever it might be in the case of our customers. But I think making it relatable and making it simple, like all that explanation, we have so much that we know about our products. We try to explain that sometimes, and we have to remember that communication superpower.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, let me tie into another place marketers struggle with communications. You talked about, communicating all around the organization. I totally agree. But, we've fielded benchmark reports in the past, and every year when the economy was good or whether the economy was bad, the top challenge was always marketing budgets, right? And so that's where it becomes so important to communicate, for lack of a better word, up. Is it to the CEO? Is it to our investors? Is it to the public markets? And also another thing I like that you mentioned, you specifically mentioned when you were talking about that, communicating to the people in finance and making sure they understand your mission. The other thing we have to understand when we're communicating about the mission is the monetary, the fiscal mission. Oh, I've had a guest before who said one of her lessons was make the CFO your best friend. So I want to ask you about this next lesson. I love it. No matter how big or small your company, it's important to build a path to return on marketing investment, ROMI, from the get-go. So you want to give us a sense, I don't know if it's at the current company or previous company, how did you come in and do that from the get-go? How has that affected those relationships, and how has that affected that ability to get the budget to grow your team?
Yeah. First of all, I love the idea of making the CFO your best friend. I think that's a very good lesson. And yes. it's one that I've followed or have learned over my career too. But you can't think of finance as sort of like an alien on another planet. They really are like your best friend in terms of being able to demonstrate how marketing impacts the growth of the company. Because there's a lot of things that we do that are tangible. Okay, we generate leads. You have to be able to track that. In B2B, I think it's very difficult to do attribution. Like that's a contentious place, but you can definitely show influence in a multi-touch, multi-dimensional sales process. In our case, we're selling capital equipment with software and also reagents. So it's a complex sale. It's multi hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's not something that you're going to convert online. So as B2B marketers, I think you have to be critical in assessing what you need to do and fund. I kind of use the rule of thumb, think about in a year from now, am I going to regret not doing this? Or is it going to be like, thank goodness I didn't do that, So I think having a critical lens, and then in today's digital driven, data driven world, I think you have to lay foundations early. So at Seer, we've implemented a CRM system. So we use Salesforce very early on so that we were able to track what was coming in from a lead standpoint, from our website. And that has been absolutely critical in laying foundations with our CFO, with our CEO, in understanding how marketing touches sales and what can and can't be measured directly, because there's a lot of indirect things when you think about, sort of unique views that you're creating with media, or if you're thinking about just overall SEO kind of effectiveness. You can't tie that directly to revenue, but you can begin to educate executives early on about all of the steps in that process. And I think that's really important. You can't kick that puck down the road. I think 20 years ago, we weren't being held as accountable to return on marketing investment. But now with, these capabilities in the marketing stack, with digital playing just the majority role in most of the selling process and buying discovery process now, you can't get away from it. So don't kid yourself about that.
And so I wonder, you coming into Seer, how you prioritize. So you were at Illumina, much bigger company. You come into, you mentioned much smaller company, team of 4. So when you're at a bigger company like that, sometimes, and something is so established, like you've got, I don't want to say unlimited resources, but certainly a lot more resources to get these things done. You come in with a smaller team, and you see, like, boom, there's a lot of things you could have done coming in, right? Branding, I don't know, content marketing, whatever. But it sounds like you came in and you said, here's where I want to start. We're going to implement a CRM, and we're going to set up a return on marketing investment so we can clearly, track all this and report this up to where we have to report it. Is that about right? Is that what you did, or am I off on that?
Yeah, I think so. So, first I'll reflect a little bit on the Illumina experience, because I feel like I was very fortunate to join that company when they were small. I mean, we were like 7 people in marketing, and that grew to a marketing ecosystem of nearly 500 over the course of my time there. And I had about a fourth of that and had to run through a marketing transformation program there. So there were so many learnings about just where we invested, where certain decisions that were made at different times ended up costing marketing more, how you have to really, not be attached to your org structure as you scale or to the way you've done things, and be willing to reinvent marketing as the company scales, especially when you're growing quickly, or in today's world when the macroeconomic environment is changing. You just have to constantly be willing to look in the mirror. So the benefit of that experience over that time and over that scaling really gave me a level of scrutiny coming into a smaller company that was just getting going. Because when I joined Seer, we had just started early commercial access to our product. So it was literally ground floor. And so I had that eye to say, okay, what are the things that if I don't do them now, I'm really going to be screwed a year from now? And so I systematically went through and laid brand strategy in place, because if you have to fix that 2 or 3 years down the road, you're not going to be happy and it's going to cost you a lot of money. I put core digital infrastructure in place, so a CRM system, marketing data management. So with us, we use Pardot, which is part of Salesforce, so that we could actually track what we were doing and understand who our customers are and manage their experience. And then I set about building a team of utility players, is what I will call it. In our field, we kind of have in my organization, I have product management, product marketing, something called the applications lab, and market development. And then I have the communications like web campaigns and corporate communications as part of it. But when you're small, you have 4 people, you need utility players that can move in and, write a press release or deal with your social media channels, or they know how to write product requirements, but they can also conduct a sales training. So I think talent is also a really big part of that early stage. So to me, it was like, get your brand in gear and have an eye on how that's going to scale, get your infrastructure in place so you can actually measure and manage, and then put the right people on the team for the early stage so that you're not crippled by a lack of skill sets,
And so just for you and your career, thinking like if another CMO is listening at a bigger, more established company, maybe they have this opportunity to go to a smaller startup. I mean, is that one of the benefits? Hey, I can build this more from the ground up. I've got more control of this, because being at that bigger company, I mean, there's, like I said, there's a lot of nice things about it, right? You got a roster of agencies you trust, probably. You've got a big media budget, a big brand. You've got specialists. You might have someone specifically focused on data science right there on your team. You can pick up the phone and call whatever you want, versus, like we said, going in a smaller company. But on the flip side, my gosh, you've got the tech stack and it's hard-coded and it's hard to make changes and there's all these different things, right? So when you were looking through that just from your career decision, if you can share that, was that sense of like, hey, wait, I can kind of start from the ground up and build this how I wanted to build it now?
Totally. I mean, I have a number of colleagues at Seer who have come from, some of them from Illumina, some of them from other companies that were large. And we talk and joke a little bit about how we cannot make the mistakes of companies past, like we've learned from sins of the past. Yeah. So we can bring the best of. I mean, and to be fair to some of the companies like Illumina, Thermo, these bigger companies, they've been around for a long time. You incur kind of debt in the company over the time as you build your marketing. And it's hard to just go back. You can't just wipe the slate and go back. It's much harder and takes much more investment to make changes. But, at this day and age, starting in a company and having learned from these companies past, and also with just the set of tools we have as marketers, just the digital landscape is so different. if you were in a company for 20 years, I mean, even 10 years ago, the digital landscape wasn't like it is today. So you didn't have some of the options that you have today. And so, being smart about saying what didn't work before, and I'm definitely not going to do that again. Like, how can we avoid some of those things? So one of the key lessons that I took to Seer with our technical architecture is don't snowflake yourself into oblivion. Like, don't highly customize everything. Chances are the out-of-box workflows are probably going to work because those choices make technical debt for you in the future. Same thing with brands, campaigns. You can just learn from that and, do the right things.
Oh man, I've learned that lesson. Another lesson is, boy, if you want to go homegrown too, if you want to go homegrown 5 years from now, you won't be able to hire someone who knows that out of the box versus if you go with something off the shelf. So, yeah, I love that. Let's talk about now. I call this like a kind of a work-life lesson, your next lesson. So we have this idea of work-life balance, like our work and our life are separate and try to balance it. But we also have this kind of work life. We're humans at work too. We're people at work too. And the lesson is pretty simple. Be authentic, right? As simple as those two words are, it's not simple at all. So tell us from your experience how you learned this lesson, why you want to pass it on.
Yeah. Well, I think it comes from, a couple of different places. So early on in my career, I was in the lab. So I'd originally had a career trajectory to go to medical school. So I got into medical school, and then having worked in practices, all the doctors I worked with were saying, don't do it. So then I'm like thinking, okay, well, great. But now what do? I'm in a lab and I'm thinking, this is so not me. Like sitting around waiting for experiments to incubate. A lot of people in science are more quiet and introverted. Not everyone, and I am definitely not like that. So, I leaned into, I would say, my personality and ended up in a role as a technical support scientist. So what this is somebody who answers customer inbound calls and helps them troubleshoot their experiments using the products that the company sells. So I found in that sort of a piece of myself, I guess I would say, in terms of, being a communicator and just having a natural ability for that. I'd always loved writing. I ended up writing a lot of the handbooks for Invitrogen at that stage. And then I found myself kind of gravitating to marketing from there, which I don't think is a stretch for most of us. I think we understand what that means and, how multidimensional it is, how many people and functions across the company you get to work with. And so I went from being on phones all the time, which the repetition of that also was not something that fit, to being this multidimensional marketer. And I just sort of found myself in that process. Okay, so that was kind of stage one, is like really mapping to who I am and what gets me going every day to architect my career. And then I think the second piece of it came as an executive. So starting with Illumina, as that company grew, I think as a woman too, you kind of can take on veneers as an executive that you think you should have in order to fit in. There were many, many times when I was the only woman around a table in an executive meeting or in a meeting in general. And so you can have a tendency to dampen who you are as a person. And for me, I'm a very, I would say, empathetic. I care a lot about people and relationships. I like to have fun at work. Even though like I might think, well, as a head of marketing, I should be more serious and be more matter of fact and, try to fit in with the boys club in this way and that way. And I remember making an active decision not to do that because I thought about the women to follow me and how it would be really a crime to say you can't be yourself and be a leader. I mean, I'm a mom, daughter, sister. I bring all of those things to work, especially in a time when, your laptop, your phone, your work and life are so enmeshed together. It's not like we have this clean compartmentalization that allows us to just turn on and off. So I found for me that has worked, that being who I am, letting that show, bringing that to the boardroom as well as to the break room, that has helped me in organizations to lead because it has engendered trust. I feel like it has helped others who maybe would have felt like they had to mask themselves. And I think it's allowed me to create more of an impact because I'm like sort of emotionally wired in to the way the company, the way the company is, like who we are, culture building. So I kind of went on a little bit there, but I hope that gives you a good sense.
Well, I love that lesson. I agree. I feel the same way. However, I feel like we got to challenge it. We got to unpack that a little. I got to take the impossible side and and I warned you it would, right? And go. And so I wonder how you balance that authenticity with the necessarily professionalism that you need in the role. And I'll give you an example to kind of get you thinking. So we actually ran a test recently, like an A/B test with our CEO. So he's actually up in Montana, Flint McLaughlin. He's on a mountain. He recorded a video and we were doing it for an ad, and he was in a suit and traditional, whatever. And there was something with the video or something went wrong. He had to come back in. He just happened to be back, but by the time he had to do it again, he was in his regular dress, which he looks like a cowboy. He dresses like a cowboy, right? He's up in Montana on a ranch. And so what happened, we actually ended up having these two videos, and we're like, well, that would be a good test. And we tested in the channel ad test, and we thought, and I wanted, not only did we thought, I was biased, I wanted the natural kind of authentic, for lack of a better word, one to win. But the professional version actually won. And there's a lot of caveats. It's in the channel. So that's a first touch. When they get deeper and know us, I mean, I'm like this, it's a little different. But I thought it was surprising. It just got me to this idea of like how much we have to challenge this idea of be authentic. And then the other thing I was thinking for you specifically in your industry, I saw in the Wall Street Journal, maybe it was this morning, maybe it was yesterday, I don't remember, Elizabeth Holmes, Theranos, she's going to jail. She's trying to stay out of jail. She's going to jail, right? And if, I'm sure most people are familiar with it, but she kind of brought that many things she didn't do that were authentic in actually perhaps lying and being fraudulent about how her product worked. But one of the things she brought was that kind of tech laid back feel to your industry, wearing the turtlenecks, whatever. And so you know what I mean? Like, and so sometimes when people hear that be authentic, they think, oh, it's like tech. It's like, I'll wear a hoodie and flip-flops or whatever. And sometimes in communication, we look at these signifiers, and it can be hard to say like, oh, there was her. She was wearing a turtleneck, not a lab coat, not a sport coat. And then look at that, she lied about her product. So just want to unpack. There's a lot there to unpack, but how do you balance that authenticity with professionalism, and especially in your industry where there's so much this feeling of like that the person needs to know the stuff, right? They need to know their stuff, and we need to believe this just flat out scientifically works, and whatever value proposition we're setting up scientifically works. So have you had to juggle there? Have you found a way to balance that? Is there a balance?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great thing to unpack. I mean, I think when you say, look, you have to be authentic, it doesn't mean that all aspects of who you are on 100%, level 10 all the time. I still think, and this comes back to, marketers having superpowers that we can leverage professionally, I think in ways that a lot of disciplines don't necessarily have, that is, part of communicating is understanding your audience. So, while you want to not be a false person, so, to use the Elizabeth Holmes example, so, not artificially creating or misrepresenting in any way, like almost having a persona or a veneer that's contrived. You have to be able to be credible and represent. And there might be environments. There's certainly environments in my role where I'm with, top scientists from around the world on a call, and sort of that bubblier side of myself, it's not absent by any means, but I might dial it back because I'm reading the room. I mean, because none of us is in a bubble, right? We're a person and a set of values and behaviors in a world of others. And so part of that is having enough emotional intelligence to understand when to dial up and dial things down. But I think for me, the point of authenticity is not to hide yourself when you're in a professional realm, because not only do I feel like that creates friction for you as an individual, and eventually you'll burn out because it takes a lot of energy to pretend to be somebody that you're not, but also because I think that you just have this ability to build trust and credibility, because we all sense when people are really being real, like who someone is. And again, like referring to my own kind of strengths or personality, like I have found even in a serious world like science, that sort of who I am has really helped me to build credibility and trust, and for people to feel like they can ask me things they can't ask other executives, or, um, you know, lean into things that I'm trying to lead because they know that I'm being authentic. So it's both an art and a science, I guess I would say, Daniel. And you have to use emotional intelligence to kind of balance it in every situation. But I believe it's possible.
I'm on board. I'm on board. I agree. And I love read the room. That's one key thing I took away from read the room. It's really understanding the context of each interaction, and you can't show up as there are different facets to us, right? When we're saying be authentic, there are many different facets to us, and you can't show up the same way for each person in each situation. So I really like that. And I think it ties into your next lesson. You mentioned communication is key, which we've kind of talked about some, but you have a unique background. I love that you have that scientific background we talked about. You were also the chief of staff at Illumina for 2 different CEOs, right? And during the CEO transition. So what did you learn from that?
Yeah, that was amazing. So I will qualify it by first saying I had never been a chief of staff, and my then boss, so Jay Flatley, who was CEO of Illumina at that time, had never had a chief of staff. So it was sort of one of those leaps of faith you take in your career, which I think is a big lesson in and of itself, is don't be afraid to take some leaps of faith that might give you a different lens on the company or the brand or whatever it might be. But a chief of staff role is something, and I actually talked to a lot of chiefs of staff in different industries as I was transitioning into that role. It's such an interesting role because it's kind of do anything and everything that your boss, the person your chief of staffing needs you to fill in for. So it can be all different kinds of things. And I had the privilege of being chief of staff to Jay and then Francis D'Souza, who's the current CEO of Illumina, during that whole period of the CEO transition. So I was kind of a joint chief of staff, not the joint chiefs of staff, but the joint chief of staff. And so many lessons, Daniel, but I really feel like from working so closely with both of those CEOs, a lesson I had from Jay, and this was early on, but actually before I was his chief of staff, was really around ask for forgiveness, not for permission. I remember I was in a break room and I was saying to him, what do you think about this idea? It was an idea for something in marketing. He said, ask for forgiveness, not for permission, and I think that was such a great lesson because it's like, you don't have to be looking to get consensus or looking to make sure everybody's okay with something that you're going to do, especially in a growing company. At the time, Illumina was very young. You have to be bold, you have to have vision, and you have to champion things. I mean, I would say from every CEO that I've worked closely with, including my current CEO, Omid, like they all have that, right? That's why they are where they are. And as chief of staff, you get to see how they run the company, how they operate themselves, what's important to them. So I really learned something from each of the CEOs that I worked with, but in particular, that chief of staff role really gives you an inside lens on what it means to be CEO and what it takes to be CEO.
That's great. Well, and one thing I really like that you said too, I've never been a chief of staff, but I've worked in an executive comms position. And when you're working with a high-level executive, I like how you said you need to do what needs to be done. You need to do what you need to do to support them. And there are many times executive comms, I was writing things for them. I mean, in an ideal world, executive comms, it's like, okay, what should we say? I will say that well. We will move on. Many times it's, you are far too busy. I will write something. Is this the thing to say? And that, especially starting at first, just feeling that you can say that for someone is such a challenge. I mean, thousands of people that report them around the globe. Obviously, I would, just to be clear to anyone listening, I would never release anything until they reviewed it.
Of course.
But stepping in for them and saying, clearly this is the help you need, like just having that confidence to do it. So I want to, in the first half of the episode, we talk about lessons from the things you made in marketing. In the second half, we're going to talk about lessons from the people you made them with, including some of the CEOs you worked with. But before that, let me say that the How I Made It in Marketing podcast is underwritten by MECLabs Institute, the parent organization of Marketing Sherpa. And to learn how MECLabs services can help you get better business results from deeper customer understanding, Visit meclabs.com/results. That's MECLABS.com/results. Okay, let's look at some of those lessons from the people you made it with, as we said. The first person you mentioned, Jay Flatley, the former CEO of Illumina, you talked about. You said the lesson was ask for forgiveness, not for permission. So I want to ask you now, though, as a leader, how you use that lesson with your team. So not only are you a leader, you are a leader in an industry I would assume has high compliance and regulatory standards that you have to deal with, plus you're a public company. So, and this is why I like to go here, is a lot of these lessons sound good and they are good and we should follow them. Sometimes I've told people a lesson, they go off and do something. It's like, well, wait a minute, like there's balance to everything. Like, why did you do that? You said this, there's balance to everything. So how do you balance ask for forgiveness, not for permission with compliance, public company, all these other factors you got to deal with as a leader now yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think you raise a really good point in that, in life sciences, we're kind of preclinical. So we're at that interface of highly regulated and sort of exploratory, because research by definition is about asking provocative questions and trying to find, meaningful answers. But I think that whole idea of asking for forgiveness, not for permission, I've used a ton of times. Like that was really, and that was almost 20 years ago that he said that to me. So it stuck with me. And so sometimes when I'm hesitant, because my nature is to try to bring people along, then I remember that and I think to myself, okay, is this something, again, you have to use your emotional intelligence and your business intelligence to say, okay, this is something I really see I need to do. It might be to champion a new way. A lot of times, I think at the company that I'm at, there's a new process that needs to be put in place because we're just kind of not connecting or moving something forward. And so I asked myself, okay, this isn't necessarily my role, but should I be doing this? And is there anybody I need to look side to side and say, okay, does it make sense for me to just move, pulse, do, and then I get myself off of the tee and go. And that has paid off over and over and over again. So you can't like blindly do it, like say, I have this idea, therefore I'm just going to go and do it and don't worry about legal or regulatory or any of those things. But really in an agile way, identifying and solving problems in an organization when you're in the C-suite, I think is one of the ways that I've used that. And then I use it a ton just as a marketing leader, because I do feel very strongly that marketing raises the flag that the company follows. I mean, everyone wants to be inspired both inside and outside of the company by a brand, a product, an industry, a vision for the future. In the case of life sciences, this idea of curing diseases, better treatments for diseases, et cetera. So I think by definition, as a marketing leader, you have to be out in front of the whole company. And you're not going to do that if you're always looking, to get permission from everybody to do things. So I use it both inside the company and then as a marketing leader.
So I hear you, and I agree with everything you said for you. But what about for as a leader yourself? You manage a team. What about for them? Like, how do you balance that ask for forgiveness, not for permission, with being in compliance, being regulatory? Because you clearly are very experienced. Had deep emotional intelligence, been in many situations. I very much trust your judgment, and we have to trust the judgment of people we're reporting that report to us as well. But I'd imagine you have a wide variability of how experienced they are, how much they've been in professional situations. So how do you balance that with staying in compliance, regulatory, like doing all the right things, but empowering them?
Yeah. I mean, I spend a lot of time with my direct reports. I have a pretty flat organization at this stage, because it's a young company. And I try to teach them the lessons that they don't have. So, at my stage in career, mentorship and sort of helping the next generation come up is pretty important to me. And so helping them through, like I encourage the ideas and the thinking out of box, and then help them ask questions to help them evaluate, okay, can you just champion this or do you need to ask some questions? And so that's what I do to kind of help them, try to help them develop that in an accelerated way, that same level of both EQ and business IQ and the things that then interface with whether you go or you don't go.
Nice. I like that. And by the way, I like how you explained experimentation, because I think we as marketing experimenters can use that as well. Running A/B tests, just trying to understand our customers better. It was like be boldly curious. And what was that?
Yeah. Well, be boldly. I don't know. What did I say?
I
Be
don't know.
bold. But yeah, you have to be bold, and you have to be curious, and you have to think out of the box. I mean, you
Yeah.
should always be challenging the status quo as a marketer.
Yeah, no, I love that. But it's not just for science. I think that's for marketing as well. We can all do
Oh
that no matter
yeah.
what industry we're in. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
all right, here's another lesson. Dig deeper than the data to create a story that's much more impactful and meaningful. And you learned this from Francis D'Souza, who is the current CEO of Illumina. I guess this is who it transitioned to when you were chief of staff.
Yeah, exactly. So Francis came from the tech industry into genomics, which is a challenging thing to do. And so he was always pushing to connect with the story. So I think, as a marketer, I think storytelling is kind of innate, but I think working with him, I came to appreciate that even more, especially at the executive level. I mean, you talked about like executive communications. I did a ton of that for him. I think that being able to reference, like bring real data through to create impact, how many patients is this going to affect? How many lives could this change? And then diving down into a real story of personal connection was something that was really important to him. So it just reinforced for me how that can bring things to life coming from, the sort of the bulkhead of the company. I mean, really, that was really important. And then, it also, I think, taught me that different leaders like to communicate differently, because he was a little different than Jay. He's different than Omid. And so just understanding the C level or the CEO seat in particular, and how different that can be and how different companies can operate because of that vision, was also a piece of that lesson. But yeah, it just kind of cemented that for me.
Well, let me ask you, I wonder if you have any tips on humanizing the data, because you kind of, we talked about before, even like complex products, it gets hard. The data sometimes, I interviewed on a Sirius XM show from Catherine Hayes at Wharton, and one of the things she said that stuck with me is, the word consumer, where we think of people as a unit that consumes, like that's what they are. And sometimes when we look in data, we lose the humanity with it. So when it comes to, either being, in science or just like a public company, like if anyone listening has never been on an earnings call, like try going on an earnings call where you get beat up for having, 11 cents of earnings per share instead of 12 cents, and then trying to still bring humanity to things, right? So have you learned any tips on bringing humanity to that data, not just looking at consumers as people who consume?
Yeah. I mean, I think, just resonating with what you were saying about the earnings call in B2B, and often in building companies like Seer, there's a journey that you have to take to get technology to be adopted. And there's a vision connected with that. And sometimes there's a space in between where that journey is and what that vision is. And so I think you have to be convicted about what you're doing and why you exist, and really sell that vision to your audiences while you're delivering from an execution standpoint. It can be tenuous sometimes. And I think, I learned a lot from Jay Flatley, because he was really an very artful CEO at this. He was an extremely good businessman and a visionary. I mean, he's really a luminary in the space of genomics. And being able to bring people through that and kind of be pragmatic about data, but connect that to what it could look like over the next 5 years. Like, I remember he used to do predictions. So he would say, in 10 years, every baby will be sequenced at birth. In 5 years, cancer will be treated as a chronic disease. So that's a way of taking where we are today, which is 40 years of the war against cancer, yet mortality is still high, to what it could look like in the future, and connecting that vision with reality and numbers. So I learned from the best on that one.
And I think that ties into the last lesson we have here. See the opportunity in any situation. And you said you learned this from your current CEO, the CEO of Seer, Omid Farrokhzad.
Yes.
So how did you learn this from Omid? I know you mentioned him a few times before in the podcast.
Yeah, no, Omid is great because he is an MD by training, an expert in nanomedicine, and started a company based on nanotechnology to really do something different in proteomics, like I was mentioning Seer does. And he's so enthusiastic, great, like charismatic person, tells the story extremely well. And he's like super positive around, hey, KP, I only see the glass as it's full, half air, half water, instead of the glass is half empty or the glass is half full. Because you always hear people saying the glass is half full. And he's like, no, it's half air, it's half water, it's all full. And I just thought that was such a great embodiment of the conviction you have to have when you're starting and growing a company. I mean, you cannot be distracted by the negative. You have to always flip it on its head and say, I'm seeing progress. Here's where we're going. Here's how we're going to change the world. And I just love that about him.
I love that. I love it. Let's battle test it for a second. Okay. So
sure.
We all just went through COVID-19, the pandemic, the entire world, and I wrote an article about the hidden upside where brands and marketers share 10 opportunities from, the COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, horrible, horrible situation. To your point, there are upsides in everything. We can see the opportunity. They talked about adopting a new way of working, deeper connections with customers, more gratitude they have. So again, obviously COVID-19, don't want to make light of it. It's very difficult. But were you able to see the opportunity in that situation, especially given the industry that you work in? I mean, I don't know if in my life there's ever been a bigger focus in your industry. And when you saw something, and I know this became political, but when we saw something which was a modern miracle of a vaccine being developed so quickly and some of these things, like how were you able to, as a marketing leader, see the opportunity in that situation?
Well, for our industry, I think we were in a particularly strong position, Daniel, because, if you couldn't imagine the COVID outbreak without genomics. I mean, the tracking of it, the variant understanding, the vaccine development, all of that was enabled by what Illumina did in DNA sequencing. And so, for me as a leader in a company that's bringing proteomics to bear, it was so inspiring because it's like, we have to keep fighting this fight because we are going to make the same thing happen in proteomics. Like, there are studies that are going on to understand vaccine response with proteomics. And so imagine how that could change things for our next, hopefully we don't have a next outbreak, but for our next outbreak, which, hopefully we won't have. But so I think I was at a little bit of an advantage there because of the company and industry that I work in. But there was a lot of opportunity in that because you could really see how science can impact things. I think as a communicator and as a marketer, kind of separating myself from the industry that I'm in, I think there were a lot of lessons that we learned about transparency, bringing people along, leading through crisis, leading remotely, and just how you actually had to over-communicate during that time in order to keep people intact, So I think that was huge.
Great. All right. Well, Karen, we've talked about so many different things about what it means to be a marketer, from that transparency to just knowing your industry well, which your background gave you the ability to do. In your opinion, what are the key qualities of an effective marketer?
So, I've talked a lot about authenticity. So I do think you have to be able to connect with people and inspire them. And so I think you have to lead from where you sit. So if you are a passionate, feeling, empathetic person, then you have to do that. But lead with authenticity is one. I think the second is something we also talked about. So be bold and have a vision. You have to push yourself out to the bleeding edge. If you're not doing that, if you're not personally uncomfortable, then you're probably not leading from that bleeding edge. And then I think the third thing is you really have to lead with that, like, intelligence, data driven. Like, I almost feel like it's a cornerstone of your experiences. Do the things that worked in other places, but don't bring the bad behaviors with you just because you're used to them. Having your data and your analytics together, and then having your team together, kind of those foundations. You have to never, maybe I would say it's come back to your foundations. And make sure you have good marketing fundamentals in place and teach those fundamentals, because we're always responsible for bringing up the next generation of marketers. And if they don't learn them from us, who do they learn them from?
I love that. And hopefully that's the benefit of everyone who listened to this episode. I know I learned stuff. You taught me. So thank you so much for this conversation, Karen.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure, Daniel. Thanks.
Thanks to everyone for listening.
Thank you for joining us for How I Made It in Marketing with Daniel Burstein. Now that you've gotten inspiration for transforming yourself as a marketer, get some ideas for your next marketing campaign from Marketing Sherpa's extensive library of free case studies at marketingsherpa.com. That's marketingsherpa.com.